This week in our Sheltered Instruction Operation Protocol class, we're focusing mainly on lesson delivery. And so if you access Moodle and you go under the current module for this week, you'll be able to access this sway that appears here on the screen. So this week we're going to be talking a lot about the flipped classroom. So you might want to begin by watching this first video here that I've created, specifically looking at how the flipped classroom might be implemented within the language learning classroom. And so this video here was made with some colleagues of mine online, so you might want to take a look at this as we begin discussing the flipped classroom. You might also want to look at WebQuest, and I included a link here that will take you to some visuals explaining what a WebQuest is. You can search to find out what a WebQuest is, but you might also look at the idea of flipped classrooms and also implementing WebQuests, as they are both very much related, and you might find those useful tools when you're reflecting on your own class and how you might flip your own classroom experience for your students. So the first essential question for this week: what's the optimal way to create the most value for your students in achieving personal and curricular goals throughout a particular content course given in English as an additional language? The next main concept for this week is, again, looking at content and language objectives and thinking very specifically now how we might make those objectives explicit. So the next essential question is, how will I make personal and curricular objectives explicit throughout the learning trajectory? So look at how you might introduce these objectives at the beginning of the lesson, for example, or the unit, or even the course. And also looking at how you can have students reflect on their own personal objectives, whether those personal objectives are shared with you as the educator, or if they are just thinking about it themselves and working towards those. But again, if you can have ways that your students share those personal objectives with you, this might also help as you adjust your own teaching for those particular considerations. The next key concept for this week: students engaged 90 to 100% of the time. So thinking very specifically how we can create further engagement. And the flipped classroom really sets out to look at what students can learn outside the classroom, either through videos, for example, or audio podcasts. What can they learn on their own, even if it's just looking or searching the internet, trying to gain information or knowledge before they go in and meet with you face to face. The idea here is to use the flipped classroom model so that the face to face time, those times where you have class with your students, you can create as much value and interaction as possible. So the next essential question is, how do these three tenets of student engagement come together to form optimal learning experiences for your students? These three optimal engagement areas are: how can your students engage with each other, and how might they engage with other experts outside the classroom, and also obviously how will they engage with you as their instructor, as their facilitator, as their coach. The second is, how will your students engage in the content, that is the ideas or concepts or key words throughout the learning trajectory. And the third is, how will they interact with materials or technologies. So basically think of in terms of realia, any type of materials, whether authentic or non-authentic, how will they interact with those objects and materials as well. So really the idea is, how will they more collectively engage in all three of those? How will they engage in each other? How will they engage in the content? And how will they engage in the materials in a way that is productive for them? The next essential question is, how does student engagement relate to the effectiveness and the efficiencies of the learning experience? So although engagement is very important, and we'll be talking a lot about engagement in terms of the flipped classroom, of course, we also need to think in terms of the effectiveness of the classroom experience or the learning experience, and how efficient we are making the learning experience as well. So it's really a combination of those three: engagement, effectiveness, and efficiency within the learning experience that really matters at the end of the day. So here are some videos that you might take a look at. Of course, there are many others But take a look at the flipped classroom and some of these examples and see how, again, the flipped classroom could be implemented within your own teaching practice. Lesson pace according to students' ability level. We'll be addressing this once again this week. So think about this week not only about how you are creating the appropriate lesson pace for your students based on the students' abilities, but more importantly, how will you detect whether or not the pace is appropriate for your students? Of course, we get signals from our students in class, but that could be accurate. It could not be accurate. It could even be absent. Maybe they're not providing any signals. Maybe it's not obvious. Although we've talked now about lesson pace, this week I'd like for you to specifically think about how you can detect whether or not the pace is appropriate for your student. And this typically is obtained through feedback from them. Whether they are sending you signals in class, whether you can kind of detect in class whether or not the pace is appropriate, or it might even be having them provide anonymous information to you so they have the confidence to speak freely and give you information that you can then infer whether or not your pace is appropriate or not. So I think very much in terms of how you will detect this information within your own teaching practice. The final essential question, how will I detect whether or not my pace is too fast or too slow when it comes to student engagement? The activity for this week now is to really consider these essential questions and create an online space and reflect on the process of student engagement within the context of your own teaching practice. Share your reflections by including the link to your public online space, and we'll have a shared document that we've used in other activities. And distribute this publicly throughout the social media channels if you're currently using social media. Now, if you're not using social media for professional development, first of all, I would encourage you to do that. But if you're not, that's fine. But if you are currently using Twitter, for example, or Facebook, or any other social media, again, for professional development purposes, feel free to share this reflection and this online space with your colleagues publicly. An online space might include some of the following. You might create an online Word document or PowerPoint or Excel spreadsheet. You could also use Google Docs if you're more familiar with Google. You could create a public wiki, or if you already have one, you could add it to that. If you have a public website, you might use that, or personal blog, or even a Facebook page or group. So this is our focus for this week. This week we will be working together to put together this activity, again, thinking in terms of lesson delivery within the context of our own content course given in English as an additional language. I look forward to seeing your efforts. If you do have any questions, obviously feel free to ask in class, and you also may send me an email. And I look forward to seeing your contributions for this week.